Hi, and welcome to our third video in this mental health series. This one is about boundaries. This is Dr. Alison Caldwell-Andrews. I'm a clinical psychologist, and today we're going to talk about how you can use boundaries to improve your mental health. There's different kinds of boundaries: physical, physiological boundaries, behavioral, moral or spiritual boundaries, cognitive boundaries, emotional boundaries. And we're going to talk just a little bit about each of these, but we're going to focus primarily on behavioral boundaries because these are the things we think of when we most often think about having boundaries. Physical boundaries are like a fence or a wall, a line, a lock, a line of buoys on the water. These are physical boundaries. Their job is to make a line so that people will stay on one side of the boundary or the other side. Physiological boundaries, on the other hand, are more like boundaries that we have with our physical body. So this would be a limit. How many hours can you stay awake? How many words can you memorize? How far can you stretch? How high can you jump? Etc. Moral or spiritual boundaries are more like the kind of person that you choose to be. They're like your standard. So, for example, you could say, I don't lie, I don't cheat, I don't slack, I don't mistreat my body, I eat healthy foods. Those are moral or spiritual boundaries that you can choose based on your values. Then we have emotional boundaries. Now, this one is a little more unusual. A lot of people haven't really heard about emotion boundaries. And sometimes people get confused thinking that whatever you're feeling, I can't help but also feel. And they don't exercise any kind of attempt at having a boundary or exercise um, the skill at keeping me separate from you, you separate from me. Your emotions are your emotions, my emotions are my emotions. And basically, if somebody walks in the room and they're really upset, yeah, them being upset will definitely influence you almost all the time. But you don't have to choose to take on those emotions. Right now, you might not be very good at having an emotional boundary, but you can develop those emotional boundaries and learn how can I keep differentiating my emotions and your emotions, and I'll take responsibility for mine, although I might be influenced by yours. Cognitive boundaries, that's another boundary we don't often hear talk about, but this is really referring to the kinds of thoughts that you allow in your head, or the kinds of cognitions. And so it's about, what do you do with pop-up thoughts, the things that just pop up in your head? Do you invite them to stick around, or do you nope them, nope, that's not going to happen in my head, I'm going to think about something else, go away? So what thoughts do you nourish? What thoughts do you pay attention to? Pay attention or ruminate about or mull over and over? What are those thoughts that you allow in and thoughts that you push away or ignore? And then we have behavioral boundaries. And we're going to spend most of the time today talking about behavioral boundaries. And this is what we usually think of. When we think about boundaries, what do you put up with around you? How you let other people treat you? So let's differentiate first off what is different between the kind of boundary I'm talking about, a behavioral boundary, versus not liking people and saying, well, I don't like them, or I don't like what they said, I don't agree with their opinions, and so I'm going to have a boundary. Well, that's not really what we're talking about in terms of a boundary. That's sort of like, I want to live in my own little safe space, or my own place where I only see people who are just like me so I don't have to stretch. People can have different opinions and a personal style that is fine, but because it's not actually destroying you. You may not like it, you may feel anxious or agitated around it, and that might be on you, but they're not actively destroying you. They're not denigrating you, insulting you, making your life really miserable. It's just you don't like hearing the way they say something, etc. So let's make sure that we have that that understanding first, because I'd hate for you to apply some of these things to people who simply are just different. And so this is where you want to learn some tolerance and and not just learn how to be around the kind of person who matches you. So boundaries aren't the same as what I allow you to do or don't allow you to do. That's sort of like a fantasy that you can say, well, they're going to quit doing that because I told them I have a boundary. And a lot of people don't quit. A lot of people just sort of keep doing it. And the key is, how do I have the boundary? How do I help you see that this is not something I like? You can't control other people. You can only control yourself, and you control what you allow to be around you. And so a lot of times it really comes down to just deciding if you're requesting that someone stops doing a particular thing and that thing is relationship destroying, right? Then it might be that the best way out of it is that you just remove yourself from the situation, because you can't make people do what you want. Usually that's, maybe you have enough power and you can use power to get what you want, but a lot of times we just have to ask. And if you ask someone and they refuse to listen or to respect this boundary of yours, most of the time, then your alternative is simply to stop having the relationship or leave that area, etc. So when you expect change, it might be that you're disappointed. It might be that your request for a change isn't enough to create change. When you request change, of course, what you're doing is you're telling the person, I'm uncomfortable with the way this worked out, or I feel really disrespected when you do such and such, and I would like you to stop. So let's say it's you're hanging out with a friend, and every time you sit down, they immediately pull out their phone and completely ignore you and start texting other people or start phone calls with other people while you're sitting there. Well, this is very disrespectful behavior. And it's the kind of thing that you think, well, gosh, I don't really want to be around this. I don't want to put up with this. So I would say you could mention to the person, look, um, you and I are spending time, and I'm hurt when you are spending time on the phone, texting and talking to others while I'm with you, waiting around for you to finish talking so we can continue our conversation. And I think it would be better if you could spend time with me when we're together and then do your thing with other people when we're not together. And then, you've made your request and the other person gets to choose. And so if they continue their behavior, it won't feel good to you. And you might think, why am I even here? Why is this person actually interested in my friendship? And I don't think I want to go hang out with them. That's sort of natural. Or you might think, well, maybe if I just sit around and look pathetic enough, they'll eventually figure it out. That probably won't work. So I wouldn't expect that change to happen. I think that in some ways, you have to recognize that sometimes people just treat you without respect and you vote with your feet, really. So those are some examples. So remember here, you're the one who's responsible for keeping your boundaries. You're the one who informs the person, hey, this is a problem for me. I feel like this is crossing a line, or I would like this behavior to stop. And what you're focusing on here is behavior that really destroys the relationship. And now it might not be violent behavior, or it might be violent behavior, but generally we're not talking about violent behavior. That's a lot more clear often. We're talking about behavior that is communicating a real lack of respect for who you are and is uncomfortable or disrespectful or denigrating to you. Others aren't automatically going to comply when you ask them. And so we can't really get offended when people don't comply. We can ask them to do something and then they don't. You could be offended if you want to waste your energy doing that, but you could just say, all right, so they're just not going to respect what I'd like. They're not going to pay attention. And so I'm going to not hang out with them anymore. So sometimes you have to step away. Sometimes you have to gently remind them. But remember, you have the boundaries whenever the problem is a relationship destroying problem. So being clear and consistent when you make your request. Don't use guilt and shoulding on people to get them to respect you, because this will wear them out. You're using threats to help keep a relationship, and threats are just going to be inherently damaging to a relationship. Instead, you use consequences and you do it with kindness, being kind and consistent, and then making that difference happen really quickly. In other words, what I mean is following through really quickly. And so if you ask someone to maybe put their phone away and just hang out with you for the rest of the night, if they say, oh, okay, but then 2 minutes later they get their phone out again, I don't know that I'd wait around and see if they notice that they're on their phone again. I might say, look, I can see you're really busy on your phone. You do you, and I'm going to go home now. And then I just get myself home. And that way I'm not waiting around so long that I'm completely angry about it. Instead, I'm saying, oh, all right, so they're not really ready to comply with what I'm requesting. And it seems like they just can't help themselves engaging in this behavior I just feel really, really disrespected by. And so I'm going to walk with my feet, right? Vote with my feet. Your goal overall here is a sustainable life. If your goal is to keep learning, growing, giving, loving, you can't do that very well when you allow people in your life to act in ways that are denigrating to your self-destruct or destructive to the relationship that you have with them. A relationship destroying behavior is not the same thing as challenge or difficulty. And so if you run into challenges or difficulty, you rise above that and you solve those. So just because something is difficult doesn't mean it's relationship destroying. So let's go a little more in depth. Where are your boundaries? Well, you figure out where your boundaries are by listening to your emotions. You're blessed with this automatic signal. It's sort of like a perimeter alarm, and it's going to tell you when something crosses a boundary. The emotion that we're talking about is in the anger family. So it might be that you're irritated. It might be that you're annoyed. It might be that you're just really angry, etc. But that emotion lies somewhere along that continuum of the anger family. And your boundaries are your boundaries. They're probably unique in some ways. They're probably not unique in others, but you can't logic them. You can't reason these. You can't just look at other people and say, oh, you have a boundary for that. I think that is the boundary I should have. Instead, your body is the one you listen to, because it may be that you have boundaries that other people don't have, or some people might have a boundary that you don't have. It might be that you're okay with people texting you in the middle of the night and waking you up, or certain people maybe texting you in the middle of the night. Or it might be that you just can't tolerate anybody waking you up because you're going to fall apart if you don't get enough sleep. So you listen to your body. Your body will tell you where your boundaries are using the message of that emotion. And so if you pay attention to your emotions and you're very sensitive and you listen for that first little twang of feeling irritated or annoyed or, oh, I don't like that, then that will really help you to notice where the boundary starts and stops. Your body is pretty reliable. You may shift over your life. Some of these boundaries might shift depending on your other experiences, depending on how much energy you have, depending on if you're sick or not. So just listen continually to your emotions to figure out what is too much. We're going to now talk to Donna, who is very wise and has a lot of really valuable things to say about boundaries. And so I invite you to follow me here, and we'll have this lovely talk with Donna. And I think you'll love it. It was great. And then I will see you the following week, where we will talk about behavior train. And that's the last week of our May Mental Health Week. Here's Donna.